Welcome back to the Mom and Mind podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kat. On this episode, I am talking with Abigail Bird. She is a reproductive mental health specialist, trainer, and consultant based in San Diego. She's a licensed clinical social worker certified in perinatal mental health and the author of the Postpartum Depression Workbook. She works as a therapist, a supervisor, a trainer, and consultant. And she's here today to talk about some novel approaches to perinatal mental health, including clinical hypnosis and strategic psychotherapy. She's going to share with us how these modalities can be useful for perinatal trauma and reproductive mental health, and also about some of the trainings that she's offering in this area. So let's dive in and talk with Abby. Welcome, Abby. Thank you for being here.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's a long time coming. You and I wrote books around the same time. I think you were ahead of me though, for sure. Right, you wrote the postpartum depression workbook, and yeah, you've been doing this work for a while. So yeah, I'm happy to have you on, and especially to talk about what we're going to talk about today. It's a fun new topic for us to explore.
Well, likewise, it's a pleasure for me. And even before the books, it was fun knowing you through PSI, Postpartum Support International, and the community.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, let's dive into it. We're going to be talking about clinical hypnosis and trauma. For people who don't know what hypnosis is or clinical hypnosis, can you please kind of give us a primer on that?
Absolutely. So I think there's a lot of misconceptions around hypnosis. Sometimes the first thought someone comes into their head is standing on a stage and clucking like a chicken, or
Right, right,
Homer Simpson forgetting who he is. And that's definitely not what clinical hypnosis is about.
right.
I think the main important for me thing that I like my clients to know is that hypnosis is not me doing something to them or controlling them.
Mm-hmm.
It's about kind of helping them to get to a place where they feel a little bit more open to hear the same message we've been working on, but in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I'll compare it. I like to know if anybody has any previous experience doing mindfulness or meditation or yoga. And so it's really similar to going to kind of like that place. If you think about like the end of a yoga class, Shavasana, where you're just kind of finally able to like relax and not really like think about anything. Um, I like it personally a little bit more than meditation because I have an anxious mind and sometimes it's still hard for me to focus and it's just
Sure.
like way too
Right,
much pressure to not think about anything.
right.
And hypnosis is more like you just kind of lay back and you listen to stories. Like I like to listen to audiobooks, and typically we'll use metaphors or
Mm.
stories. And so it starts off just like a guided relaxation and then it goes into hearing stories, and sometimes the stories directly or indirectly, or, maybe you're not quite sure how they relate to your topic,
Mm-hmm.
but in a way, ultimately, you just kind of feel a shift.
Nice. Right. So there's you're not like bypassing anything. You're not people aren't waking up and feeling like they don't know what just happened over the last, whatever number of minutes.
Yeah.
Like some you were saying there's these ideas or myths about what it is. But that's not what you're talking about.
Most people remember everything. Some people, a few people don't.
Hmm.
Like a few people will go so deeply into what we call like a trance state that it's harder to kind of remember it.
Hmm.
And so one thing that we do is record it. And
Nice.
so I'll record it on my device, or they can record it just right on their phone. And then it's kind of twofold purpose. I suppose in a way, if you have any kind of questions, like what happened,
Hmm.
you have like a record of it.
Hmm.
But really the more common use for it is to listen to it again and again.
Mm.
So my clients love it because it's kind of like having their own personal guided meditation session that's uniquely tailored to them and personalized to them.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So sometimes they might want to, because it can be like super calming, like maybe they'll want to listen to it before they go to bed and just kind of like use that to go to sleep. Or if there's a time where they kind of want a little bit of calming, they can
Mm-hmm.
reuse it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one way where, if there's any kind of fear of like what's going to happen, that you're going to be able to go back and listen to it and know.
Right. Right. So I think because this, like the term hypnosis, like said, there's all these myths about it. It's been around for a long time.
Hmm.
People might put it in this kind of like woo-woo sort of
Hmm.
category of, alternative things that, whatever labels or ideas they have connected to that. But what you're describing is not that. Not that those things are bad. Be woo woo all you want for sure.
Yes.
But just to delineate this, what you're describing is not necessarily that type of alternative or super spiritually connected therapy.
For the most part, no. I have a few clients that just kind of like it. So they like the sense of like, oh, I really felt tingling energy moving and they enjoy it. But for most people, no. I have a few people who say that um, they're really experienced in meditation and have seen like colorful lights and they enjoy it. And sometimes they'll see things that I didn't even talk about it. They're just
Hmm.
kind of like on their own journey, like
Hmm.
similar to deep meditation.
Sure. Yeah.
But
Yeah. Yeah.
for
Yeah.
most people, it's more like just feeling really, really relaxed.
Hmm.
And I think it makes harder subjects more palatable.
Right.
And so that's what metaphors do. So
Hmm.
rather than talking like, let's just take, for example, quitting smoking,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
If somebody tells you don't smoke, it's bad for your health, you're like, yeah, yeah, I know, right?
Hmm.
Like,
Hmm.
like been there, done that. That doesn't help me.
Right.
And shaming somebody doesn't help. But if I were to have you just be like laying down, super comfy at home, and I tell you a story about last time I went backpacking in Yosemite, and it was just so gorgeous to see that pristine landscape. There's no roads, there's no highways, there's hardly any people. But as I was walking up to this mountain stream, I saw a beer bottle floating by. And it just was so at odds to me to see this, trash being littered in such a beautiful place.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so hearing that just kind of starts to plant the seed of like, well, what if you're trying to live your life generally healthy? You just have a few cigarettes Friday and Saturday nights. It's like
Hmm.
that beer bottle in Yosemite. It
Hmm.
it
Hmm.
kind of is at odds with what you want. And
Hmm.
so the other thing I like to tell people about hypnosis is it's not about my goals. It's not about what I want. It's
Right.
what you want. Like
Right.
it's you come and tell me like what you want, and then I'm gonna help give you some suggestions.
Right. Right. Great. I mean, it sounds like such a useful tool and
Hmm.
not one that people necessarily know a lot about. When we talk about therapy, there's so many different types.
Right.
Yeah, so shifting just slightly, can you tell us what strategic psychotherapy is?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked. So my hypnosis teacher is named Michael Yapko. Definitely look him up. He is a psychologist that is just phenomenal, such an excellent teacher in the world of clinical hypnosis, as well as really an expert in treating depression without medication. And his style of clinical hypnosis is kind of in the school of the Milton Erickson branch of hypnosis. And so it's not so you are getting sleepy like
Hmm.
hokey things, it's more conversational. And
Hmm.
so even like the induction, which is that beginning relaxation part, is just more of a conversation. It just kind of flows naturally.
Mm.
But Michael Yapko talks very much about strategic psychotherapy with the hypnosis.
Mm.
And so it's not just doing hypnosis for the sake of relaxation, it's really thinking carefully about what a person needs. And so I gave you an example of like somebody wants to quit smoking, right? And so, we might think like, okay, they need to quit smoking. So Michael's going to then break it down into what are like the 10 steps that they actually need to get there.
Mm-hmm.
So what is this person missing? And I work very much from like a strengths based perspective. So it was a little bit new for me to think about like deficits.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but what Michael says is that it's kind of actually being complementary.
Mm-hmm.
And so let's talk specifically about like maybe anxiety, right? Or after trauma. So we know in the postpartum stage and perinatal stage, there's so much anxiety. I work with a lot of people who are dealing with infertility or suffered perinatal losses. And so, of course, there's going to be um, kind of these clues or reminders of really sad and tragic things that have
Right.
happened
Right.
when you lose a wanted child or just any kind of experience that is out of your control of your body, like that's real, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so hypnosis is not like toxic positivity, like everything's fine and you're gonna
Right.
relax and have
Right.
a baby. That's not it.
Mm.
It's one big piece that comes up a lot in strategic psychotherapy is differentiation. So differentiation is a big word for distinguishing um, and kind of telling what's needed.
Mm.
So I'll give you an example. So if you've had a baby that's been in the NICU, right? You've had experiences where um, they were very near death, or you weren't sure they were going to survive. And perhaps in the NICU, there are these like alarms or bells that would go off, like, kind of these warning signs. And
Right.
so that would activate you, right? And so that activates your nervous system. What happens when we go home and we hear like so many different sounds that like set us off, right? And so differentiation is determining this is actually an immediate threat and this is not an immediate threat.
Mm-hmm. 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 That makes a lot
When
of sense.
when do I need to move into action to keep my baby or myself safe? And when do I need to self-soothe?
Right. Great. So it sounds like these are very complementary treatment modalities. I don't know. Maybe you can do them separately too, but they go together well. Is that about right?
Absolutely. And
Mm-hmm.
I love like the complementary word because it's like when I talked about like deficits, it's like complementing what someone needs, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so if someone's a very global thinker, it's helping them gain specificity.
Mm-hmm.
And so being more specific, like this is an immediate threat, this is not an immediate threat. And so hypnosis is more just like the vehicle for the message that the therapist is designing for the person they're working with.
Right. And that is so important for sure. I mean, just your point about NICU and coming home and the overwhelm and the overstimulation, like even if you haven't had any specific kind of trauma, you can for sure be overstimulated and
Mm-hmm.
have a hard time with that, like just flood of what's coming in, to be able to use that tool to differentiate and um, not feel overcome by all of what you're experiencing sounds
Right,
really, really beneficial.
right.
So how are you using this? You talked a little bit about how you're using it for in perinatal mental health, but let's go a little bit deeper.
Mm-hmm.
What benefits have you seen, or what are the ideas you have about how these modalities can be helpful for any kind of mental health along the reproductive timeline?
Well, thank you for asking. I'm currently working on a training for other therapists on kind of novel approaches to reproductive trauma.
Nice.
And while working on this, I've asked a couple of my past and current clients if I could use some of their stories
Hmm.
as case studies. And so I feel very, very fortunate that I have some folks that have kind of allowed me and just very generously to share some elements in the hopes
Right.
that it can help others. And so one person is coming to my mind that experienced a stillbirth at 22 weeks.
Mm.
And as you probably know, like of course, very naturally, there's a lot of anxiety afterwards in subsequent pregnancies.
Right. Right.
Yeah. And so there's again is like that differentiation.
Hmm.
And so especially in someone who maybe was like anxious to begin with about health issues,
Yeah.
that stillbirth experience confirmed and validated that fear that the worst could happen.
Mm, right. And that is very tricky with anxiety because
Hmm.
I mean, if it's anxiety about things that haven't happened and you're worried about them happening, it's a little bit easier to get a foothold um, in grounding yourself outside of that. But man, if it is something that's happened, it's so hard. It's
Exactly.
really, really hard.
Yeah. And so part of our work, like another thing I love to talk about, it doesn't come from any therapist. It comes from my cousin who's an improv comedian.
Nice.
And yeah, she teaches improv. And I remember her teaching the family, she's like, well, the number one rule of improv is yes and.
Hmm.
So if you're in a scene with someone and they say, like, we're on a bus, you don't say, no, we're at the zoo. Like,
Hmm.
you don't disagree with them because that's going
Right.
to completely derail the improv scene.
Right.
You always say yes and you add on.
Hmm. Hmm.
And when she told that to me, I was like, oh, I'm going to use that in therapy because that is so helpful for creating our dual awareness.
Right.
And so our dual awareness, like I think I first kind of came aware of it, like learning about DBT, like two
Hmm.
things can be true at the same time,
Right.
or it's not all bad, it's not all good. And recovering from like trauma and grief, like it's really important to acknowledge the pain
Yeah.
and to hold
Right.
space for that pain and that loss,
Hmm.
and at the same time also have an eye towards the future.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Um, that really, that in particular, the yes and is such a useful tool because people often will talk themselves out of their feelings. Like I'm supposed to
Hmm.
feel X, Y, or Z. I'm supposed to be happy because my baby's fine and
Right.
healthy. So
All that matters is a healthy baby.
right. So that, yeah, that means now that I just have to emotionally, anyways, discount everything that happened and pretend like it didn't bother me. But
Hmm.
I mean, anybody out there knows, and we know because we see it all the time, when you are not addressing things that are actually affecting you, it has real funny other ways of still showing up. And
Yeah.
it will until it's kind of addressed.
Yeah. So that yes and kind of emerged when I was writing the postpartum depression workbook. Like as I kept going, I was maybe three-quarters of the way through. I was like, this is the theme of the book that keeps coming up again and again and again. Sometimes I tell people that I think the biggest trigger for perinatal mood and anxiety disorders is when things don't go as expected.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
And
That
so that yes and helps you like mourn and move forward.
absolutely. Do you or have you seen anybody kind of like have hesitation about using hypnosis or
Mhm.
anything like that? Maybe just in general, but also, I guess, specifically related to trauma, perinatal trauma.
Yeah, so we do want to be careful with severe trauma with hypnosis.
Hmm.
So one thing to think about is that hypnosis is a form of dissociation,
Hmm.
right? And so if someone has a severe dissociative disorder or is having like severe dissociations as a part of PTSD, we
Hmm.
want to tread carefully.
Right.
And so that means kind of checking in a lot with someone. It really does not work well unless I already have a relationship of trust with someone.
Hmm.
You know, I talked about how you could do something like record it and this and that, but
Yes.
I find it works best with folks that I've already been working with and we already have that like sense of trust. And I
Hmm.
also kind of already know them. Some people are like really good at putting on a good front and you don't know when they're being
Hmm.
activated or when they're
Right.
upset.
Right.
And so it's either developing that um, collaboration that
Hmm.
someone's going to tell you when they're upset,
Right.
or just that time and getting to know them. And so my style of hypnosis is a little bit different in that I'll talk to people and also invite them to talk in the middle of it too. They don't
Hmm.
just have to lay quiet or
Hmm.
lay still.
Hmm. Um, yeah, that's good to know, right? The like therapeutic relationship is still a part of this. It's not some cold, you just go into internal and then you come out at some point. I mean, there's still the support and
Mhm.
um, but the point you're making about kind of watching out for really significant trauma and doing this, is it still possible after, like, let's say some trauma work has been done and people get to a place where it's not affecting them as severely to do it?
Well, and sometimes you don't even have to wait. You could do it in collaboration. So I had someone I was working with who had a lot going on and was doing EMDR with another therapist
Mm-hmm.
while working together. And the other therapist and I stayed in communication, and I could really build on their work. So, for
Nice.
example, we could do a meditation session around her safe place and kind of like the creation of her safe place, which is
Mm-hmm.
something that I don't know if are you an EMDR therapist?
Yeah, I have yeah, first level training.
Yeah, so I am actually not, but that is also one element that I understand that some EMDR practitioners use that I'll also use is kind of helping someone create a safe place.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so that's something absolutely, even before I did hypnosis, I would use in just kind of the guided meditations is kind of creating and designing like a place where you can go where you feel safe and kind of making that real and like what does it smell like, feel like, using your senses to
Mm-hmm.
kind of create that safety. But here's where I'm going to talk about differentiation, right? I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to tell someone what what intellectual skills do you need to decide I'm a safe person. This is a good day for us to do hypnosis, and
Mm-hmm.
you're in the right place for it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I don't want to just promise someone that it's okay. I want them to develop the ability to know that they're in the right place for this.
Mm-hmm. Man, that is a whole useful skill set just for anything. Like to be able to take that inventory for yourself and
Mhm,
make that decision. Because I think along with, in perinatal mental health, in transition into parenthood, anyways, there are so many ways that new parents talk themselves into doing things
mhm,
that make them uncomfortable,
mhm,
because they're all of that stuff they're supposed to or they should or whatever. But to like really be able to check in with yourself and decide that, like, yep, this is good and okay for me, or no, it's not, and
mhm,
then back up out of there and make a different decision. That's
mhm.
like, that could save a lot of heartache and pain for people.
Yeah.
Just that. I mean, in and amongst all the other things, but that's a really powerful tool and intervention. So the differentiation sounds like it's used throughout your work.
Mhm.
It's kind of woven into to everything.
Yeah, some the other day I was comparing it to someone I was working with who's been in recovery for a while, like using
Hmm.
12 step. And I said, "Do you remember the serenity prayer?"
Hmm.
And and I think that was like a great way to kind of quickly teach this person differentiation. So if you aren't familiar with the serenity prayer, it's grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so we're working on that wisdom.
Right, right. Really powerful stuff. Because I mean, sometimes people don't think they have a choice, and man, giving people options and choice is really powerful and empowering.
And empowering someone that they can decide,
Yeah.
is this something I want to fight or is this something I don't want to fight?
Right. And with you as a therapist too, that they can say like, "Yep, today's not the day," and that you just say, "Okay."
And that's a big part of like how I work is like empowering someone, like seeing us as a meeting of two equals. I'm not an expert doing something to them,
Right.
hypnosis or not. It's um has to, I'm a consultant that they can choose to consult with, but they have to stay the expert of themselves in their lives.
That's great. So the trainings that you're working on, is
Mhm.
this what you're talking about now? Is this what the trainings include, like learning how to do these things?
So the training I'm offering is a shorter training. It is absolutely not teaching you how to do hypnosis.
Hmm.
The psychologist I learned from, Michael Yapko, his minimum class is 100 hours, because he feels that's the minimum time you need to
Hmm.
be able to practice clinical hypnosis.
Right.
And so that was a fun class. I would say, like, there's continuing education, but when I was taking it, it felt more like going back to grad school because
Hmm.
there's, like, actually, I have it here. Like, this was our textbook.
Okay.
And
Yep.
yeah, there's our textbook, not to mention all the other, like, side readings,
Hmm.
and the practice sessions. So doing actually being a hypnosis practitioner, I'm going to say no. Like, I practice it, but I also don't consider myself able to be a
Hmm.
teacher of it. Like, I
Hmm.
will lead that for folks that come to me to experience it, but I don't feel qualified to teach
Got it.
other providers. Yeah, so the training I'll do on novel approaches will introduce things like differentiation, and then also something called utilization. So, utilizing just whatever happens to be around.
Hmm.
And so, if there is, like, the sound of a dog barking in our session, then I might talk about how, that dog is trying to warn us that there's danger. And so
Hmm.
maybe that's the function of our anxiety, is like to
Hmm.
kind of say, like, hey, like, watch out, be careful. And we
Hmm.
can thank that anxiety for trying to keep us safe and our family safe. And so utilizing just means kind of taking advantage of everything that's in your environment.
Right.
Um,
But that's
yeah.
useful because those cues are always going to be there.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't have to like
Exactly.
dig around. It is uh it almost my association to what you're saying is that it could also almost at some point be a sort of a like a mindfulness in a way that like okay, dog bark, you know, that and cueing some way for you to be mindful of your own response to things.
Exactly. Yeah. Or sometimes I'll utilize kind of the strengths in the individual person.
Mm,
So I was talking about the person I was working with, who suffered a stillbirth. In our work, I learned that she was an artist. I was
mm,
like, not just as a part of, like, getting to know her and saying, like, hey, like, you're really talented. We started to use that as our medium.
mm-hmm,
And I really encouraged her to create some artwork that represented the pain of what she had experienced. So
mm-hmm,
early on, she made this absolutely beautiful and devastating self portrait of herself right after the death of her daughter.
mm-hmm,
And then later in our work, I asked her, kind of reflecting, because she was saying that she changed, like, if she would do another. And she did another self-portrait, and just seeing them kind of side by side is really striking, to be able to see how she'd gone from such a dark view to a place of that yes, and that pain and that grief was still there,
mm-hmm.
but she also had more hope. And she even incorporated more color into the self-portrait.
It's amazing. That is such a beautiful way to acknowledge growth. It just like as you're describing it, seeing the difference, it just puts me in touch with how cool it is, what we get to walk with people through, and see
It's
them.
such an honor.
It is. It's my favorite.
Mhm.
I love it. I especially, people can't see how they're going to feel better. You can't necessarily predict what that's going to look like, but in your description of this visual representation of that, just really brings home the point of how much growth people can have. So these trainings you're talking about, when are they available and how are they available?
Well, thank you. So they will be live Zooms. I have two different dates doing pretty similar trainings for two different groups.
Mm-hmm.
September 19th will be with the International Violence, Abuse, and Trauma group. So, kind of a trauma group.
Mm-hmm.
And then October 25th, um, again, for also a live Zoom for a local continuing education group in San Diego. However, it's open to anybody around the country. It's intended for therapists, psychologists. I have spoken with the PSI certification team, and so it will meet criteria for continuing education for psychotherapists.
Nice.
Um, yeah,
How long is it?
about 90 minutes. I think it's either 90 minutes or 2 hours.
Okay, very doable.
Yeah.
Great.
I have the permission also to share those self-portraits I was mentioning,
Oh, very cool.
that were done before, the beginning of our work and then later on in our work. And
Hmm.
so I'm a very visual person, and so just having those like visual stories and visual metaphors, so that I think is going to be a really powerful part of the training.
Beautiful.
I love training, so I love
Hmm.
working with other therapists. I love working with companies. I've worked with Ergo Baby a lot. They're an
Nice.
amazing company that really wants their frontline staff to understand postpartum mood and anxiety disorders. And so I've
Right.
worked a lot with them. And then even just anybody who wants to help other people. Lately, I've been doing suicide prevention trainings
Hmm.
for just not for providers, just for anybody in their life that
Oh,
wants
cool.
to help. Um, and those are free in San Diego County. So
Hmm.
you can definitely have people reach out to me if they're interested.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for your time and putting this work out into the world and really coming today and bringing us like a different way that we can approach therapy and for something for people to think about if this might be a useful type of therapy for them or to get additional training.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. You can find more from Abby at birdtherapy.com and on Instagram at birdtherapy. And in the show notes for this episode, which you can find both in the podcast platform and on my website for this episode, you can find links to the trainings that she's offering in September and October of 24. Thanks so much for being with us today. Until next time.